here we go. This is something that we're going to do in a series because there's quite a bit. They have certain people, I'm not even going to mention who they are. They know who they are, that dispute that of my theory that the Civil War was actually initially caused by tariffs, about money, and not about slavery, which, if you look back and look at Lincoln and what he's talking about, Lincoln never started the Civil War with slavery. Slavery was never the question about why the Civil War started. But they say there's nothing to suggest that tariffs were never mentioned in any documents talking about the Civil War, the secession. Tariffs were never mentioned, which was, in fact, two documents. One by South Carolina and also the Georgia secession document talked about tariffs and money. And a lot of times, the propaganda used to start a war or perpetuate a war is not the actual reason why the war actually fought. But we will go through it because I'm just going to go through the document. We'll actually talk about other stuff, such as the first time South Carolina threatened to secede in 1832, 1833, right after the Tariffs of Abomination happened in 1828. And South Carolina threatened to secede then, and then it actually formally really got serious about seceding in 1832, 1833, but we'll talk about that later. But this is the document I actually want to talk about, the address of the people of South Carolina assembled in convention to the people of the slaveholding states of the United States. 1860, you can actually see the paper. This is the Google scan of the book, the address of the people of South Carolina, assembled in convention, right, to the slaveholding states. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's like 30, 40 pages. But we're going to get down to the meat of the video really quickly. Find me a marker. The one great evil from which all other evils have flowed is the overthrow of the Constitution of the United States. The government of the United States is no longer the government of the Confederate Republics, but of the consolidated democracy. It is no longer a free government, but a despotism, right? This was actually written by Rhett, who's a very controversial figure because he was part of the first secession movement by South Carolina in 1832. Okay, so he's the one writing this document. The Revolution of 1776 turned upon one great principle: self-government and self-taxation. Notice the word self-taxation, right? No taxation, what a representation. The criterion of self-government were the interests of two people united under one government are different. Each must have the power to protect its interests by the organization of the government, or they cannot be free. The interests of the Great Britain and of the colonies were different and antagonistic. Great Britain was desirous of carrying out the policy of all nations toward their colonies, of making them tributary to her wealth and power. She had vast and complicated relations with the whole world. Her policy towards North American colonies was to identify them with her in all those complicated relations and to make them bear in common with the rest of the empire. She had vast public debt. That's another issue, right? She had vast public debt. She had a European policy and an Asiatic policy, which occasioned the accumulation of her public debt. And they talk about the continual wars and other things. Now, to make them part of a consolidated empire, the Parliament of the Great Britain determined to assume power of legislating for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Our ancestors resisted That's what he's using. The pretensions. They refuse to be part of the consolidated government of Great Britain. The southern United States now stands exactly in the same position toward the northern states that the colonies did toward Great Britain. The northern states have a majority in Congress, and that was the problem. That's also the 3/5 of a person shit that the southern states proposed. It wasn't about giving the status of the slaves. The thing is, the southern states that didn't have the population, or the so-called free population, voting population that the North did. Notice that shit didn't come up until after the right to vote or male suffrage actually came up as an item. The northern states having the majority in Congress claim the power of omnipotence in legislating as the British Parliament did. The general welfare is the only limit to the legislation of either. And the majority in Congress, as in the British Parliament, are the sole judges of the expediency of the legislation this general welfare requires. Thus, the government of the United States has become a consolidated government, and the people of the southern states are compelled to meet that very despotism their fathers threw off in the Revolution of 1776. So the southern states see this as a revolutionary war to separate themselves, right? The consolidation of the government of Great Britain over the colonies was attempted to be carried out by taxes. The British Parliament undertook to tax the colonies to promote British interests. Our fathers resisted the pretension. They claimed the right of self-taxation through their colonial legislatures. They were not represented in the British Parliament, and therefore they could not rightly be taxed by legislation. The British government, however, offers them a representation in Parliament, but it was not sufficient to enable them to protect themselves from the majority. They refused to offer. Between taxation without representation and taxation without representation adequate to protection, there is no difference. In neither case would the colonies tax themselves. Hence, they refused to pay the taxes laid by the British Parliament. And so was the southern states toward the northern states in a vital matter of taxation. They are in a minority in Congress. The representation in Congress is useless to protect them against unjust taxation. And they are taxed by the people of the North for their benefit. In other words, that's a whole different story about free land and given to immigrants and the building of railroads and all this other kind of crap that they did that the South felt they were subsidizing at their expense. For the last 40 years, the taxes laid out by Congress of the United States have been laid with a view of subserving the interests of the North. The people of the South have been taxed by duties on imports, not for revenue, but for an object inconsistent with revenue, to promote by prohibitions the Northern interest in the productions of their mines and manufacturers. In other words, they've been subsidized and protected. There is another evil in the condition of the Southern toward the Northern states, which our ancestors refused to bear towards Great Britain. Our ancestors not only taxed themselves, but all the taxes collected from them were expended amongst them. Had they submitted to the pretensions of the British government, the taxes collected for them would have been expended in other parts of the British Empire. They're saying that, in other words, the taxes that you gather from us and at our expense are being expended on something that doesn't have anything to do with us. In other words, they're saying that the people that where the money's going should pay their fair share. Yet this British policy has been fully realized toward the southern states by the northern states. The people of the southern states are not only taxed for the benefit of the northern states, but after the taxes are collected, 3/4 are expended at the north. The agricultural productions of the South are the basis of the foreign commerce of the United States, yet the southern cities do not carry it on. Our foreign trade is almost annihilated. In other words, tariffs is actually decimating their trade and their ability to actually make a living. No man can for a moment believe that our ancestors intended to establish over their posterity exactly the same sort of government they had overthrown. In its internal operation was doubtless to secure at, at the great end of the revolution a limited free government. When you hear limited free government by liberals and conservatives and yada 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 yada, this is where the shit comes from, right? This is what they call neoconservatism. This is what they call conservatism, right? Or at the time, this was liberal. A government limited to those matters only which were general and common to all portions of the United States. All sectional or local interests are to be left to the states. In other words, don't use our money for the interests of other states. Now, there's a lot more, and then after that, they get into the slave question and stuff like that. But to say that this is not the case, that there was no such thing as taxes mentioned, is bullshit. It is not. This is when it gets into slavery. It will, but that is not the piece I want to talk about, right? The first thing that he's talking about, the reason that they said they were leaving, is what? Taxes and how the money's spent. It's the economy. Most wars are fought over what? Money. Not an ideology. Even slavery is about money. About the immigrant Europeans coming in and competing. What they call is called slave labor or free labor. Anyhow, that's all I wanted to say. But this is the document. You want to say where I get it from, and it's just one of them. You can look this up. I'll put the link in the chat. And this one, basically, Rhett. In fact, they don't have his name in it. He's the one that actually wrote the speech. So it's there, and it's actually there in 1860. So what year? What month was that? 1860. I forget what month it was, but this was during their convention. But this doesn't get mentioned. Anyhow, y'all, check me out later.